doing the physics for the cereal, like a guy being pushed into it, I was not looking forward to doing that, but was surprisingly stable for having like a 20,000 plus Lucky Charms.
Hi guys, welcome back to The Process, and in this episode we speak with Kris Theorin, an amazing animator based in Philadelphia. We talk through his process of his short animation, Unlucky Charms. As always, if you like this type of content, please hit the subscribe and like buttons. It really does help a lot. Welcome to The Process.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And am I right in saying that you are a family business?
Yep, that's correct. We have... it just basically kind of worked out that way, where we all like slotted into like one part of the process. So like I do all the production and 3D stuff and animation. Then my brothers do the actual writing of it and coming up with ideas. And then my mother does all the producing and organizing and sort of getting all the connections and things like that. So it all sort of works together very nicely.
And that's been going for what, like naturally since you got into 3D, or how did that come about?
Well, it basically evolved. I used to have I had a YouTube channel that I did stop motion animation for like 10 years ago at this point, which then basically transitioned into doing stop motion for like Lego and other companies, doing like little spots like that for YouTube and things like that, a few commercials. And then at some point I basically started to slowly incorporate like 3D content into the stop motion to like sort of augment it, make it easier, better, whatever. And then, as stop motion work was sort of drying up, I started to learn more and more about doing 3D, making shorts, doing motion capture and all that sort of stuff. And that basically brought me to where I am today after I'd say 5 years of actually focusing on doing 3D animation as opposed to stop motion. And then, in 2016, I think, early 2016, we actually formed an official company out of this sort of thing we were doing.
Awesome. And where did the name come from? Something's Awry Productions. Where's that come from?
Yeah, Something's Awry. That was...
Awry, sorry.
Yeah, no, a lot of people mispronounce that.
Right.
Yeah, that came about from my older brother. For some reason, he's had the name Something's Awry. Apparently since middle school, he just thought it was a cool sounding name. And when it came time to actually form a company, that was sort of the one we went with,
So, yeah, today we are talking about the awesome Unlucky Charms short.
Yeah, so, Lucky Charms is one of our many personal projects, one of our short films that we do in between of paid commercial projects. So, this one we started way back in May, right after we finished our previous short film, Grump in the Night, because I really had an urge to do something horror related, because I really hadn't done that before with 3D animation. My stuff's been a bit more whimsical, kid-friendly sort of stuff, but I really wanted to see what kind of gruesome monster I could make. So it basically turned into Unlucky Charms. Basically, I would describe it as Krampus, but with Leprechaun as this sort of ancient evil that's been summoned through the bad deeds of our main hero character. And the whole short film is basically him trying to survive that, and it might not turn out that well. So the project before this was the Grump in the Night with the ghost and the family. Yeah. Which was really nice. I really liked that, and a really nice ending to it as well. Yeah, thank you. These two films couldn't be farther apart, but yeah, I really, after doing something as as something as, I guess, family friendly as Grump in the Night, I really wanted to swing the other way. And while they're still both kind of spooky short films, this one is certainly a bit more PG-13,
How does a project start with a brother who writes and then you come up with the creative side of things?
Yeah, so each of these projects pretty much stems from what I want to do at the moment, what I'm really interested in sort of creating, either be a type of character or world, or some sort of 3D technique. So this one really stemmed from my not only wanting to create just a cool, scary monster character, but also sort of improving how I do human characters, how I do the shading, the texturing, things like that, because I'd done a lot of humans on Grump in the Night, and there's a lot of close-ups of their faces and stuff, but I never felt like it was quite there, and the skin didn't look quite right or realistic to me, and I've always been wanting to take it further than that. So for this one, that's basically where it started, is if I make a human character that just looks good under really bland lighting, really sort of harsh convenience store overhead greenish lighting, the whole pre-production of the short really was working on those shaders, getting the texturing and all that sort of figured out. But in terms of the idea, there wasn't much of a script for this one. It basically stemmed from just an idea that was conceived by my brother back in 2017. It was a part of a big old email that had a whole bunch of horror ideas that he had. One of the ones we liked a lot was Killer Serial Mascot. So that's the one I really came back to after what was it, 5 years basically. With the help of my older brother, we were able to sort of figure out some of the beats, refine it, but a lot of the larger story or the layout of the story was basically, it came through my own just sort of brainstorming of like how it might lead to this thing and that thing. That's sort of how that whole thing came about.
We came across you, by the way, Kris, and we was like, we need to talk to Kris about this process. This will make an amazing episode, because we were all in the studio, sort of gathered around just watching a lot of your stuff.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, thanks for taking your time to do this.
Yeah, no, I'm just a big fan of doing the whole behind the scenes thing for all the shorts. Like that's like the funnest part, is actually being able to collect all the random footage I collect from doing motion capture and other test renders, and just kind of putting into like a cool montage at the end. But yeah, so this is these are what all my storyboards look like. Since I'm the only person actually working on the project, the production side of it, I don't have to worry about making these boards very coherent or very understandable to other people. But that's pretty much how I create like the sort of beat by beat moment is through this storyboarding process, where I'm able to sort of map out the key moments of the short. So parts that I have in my mind that I know is going to happen. So, you know, you have like him going to the mind realm with all the Lucky Charms and all the giant sculptures and things like that. That's a key part of the film. And then you might have other moments, like when the monster appears and I have to connect this first moment to the second moment, and I sort of figure that out through the storyboards, basically as I go. Normally in a short like Grump of the Night, at least, that one had a whole script that was a bit more structured than this one. This was a lot more about the atmosphere, about the tension, and less so about, you know, having a more in-depth character or a more, I guess, defined theme, you know. But
well, it's great to see these boards, because I see a lot of the shots are very accurate to the final, even though these are super simple. If you was to put this board next to the final frame, it's clear to see that you, like you said, you have the vision that how you want these to look.
The reason I do them in animatic form, so it's playing out like a movie, is so I can then take these shot lengths, put them into like my 3D program, and then I'm basically able to create the animation based off of that. So I know how long these shots need to be, so I'll just tailor it around that. Once that's done, I sort of drop it into this animatic. And
how in depth do you go with the animatics in terms of audio and final sound? Is the audio a key factor to the animatics to help pacing and shot lengths, or? Yeah,
so basically what you see in the stick figure version and in this rougher 3D animatic is what you see is what you get. So there's no audio over top of it. There's no music or voiceovers that I use to basically judge the moment. But normally in a production where you have like a lot of different people working on it, that probably would be a much better idea to do. But because I'm the only one working on it for the production side of it, I like can basically visualize in my mind how it's going to sound, what the music's going to be like, and I can basically then time out my scenes based on sort of my imagined version of them.
How long did this project take you, Kris, to do?
It took just over 4 months, and about a whole month of that was just rendering the film and re-rendering it. So that was a really lengthy part of it to get it out in October, because we really wanted to get it out for a Halloween thing. Yeah, which basically just kind of worked out that way. I was planning on releasing it in like early September originally, but the whole thing got pushed once I realized how long the whole thing was taking to render. But that worked out in the end. So
did you anticipate, like you say, the rendering? Or was it sort of, did it delay things massively, or was it kind of...
I had expected long render times. Grump of the Night, the short I did before this, that took about a month as well. But I did expect this one to be shorter, but it really wasn't. It was longer. And that really was just because of how complex like this convenience store was. There's so many objects, textures, and the lighting and all that stuff made it much harder to get like sort of a usable render out of the thing. So once I initially did all the renders after a month, I looked back on it and half the film was just kind of garbage. Some of the renders were flickering. There were weird artifacts everywhere. It was the strangest thing. I'd never seen it before. So I ended up having to re-render basically half the shots to fix that issue. And in a few of them in the final film, there's so much duct tape over a few particular shots to cover up all the issues that happened in the render.
Rendering wise, do you have a render farm or is it one machine?
Yep. So I use Redshift, Cinema 4D. Our setup basically is its own very small render farm. So it basically it's 2 computers, basically with 4 GPUs in each of them. And yeah, I'll basically split half the shots up between one computer and the other computer.
What GPUs out of interest?
Yeah, my main one that I use has the 4 2080 Ti's, so they're getting old at this point. They'll be upgraded sooner or later, but that's the one I have at the moment. And then the secondary render computer, that's just a bunch of Titan XP GPUs, Star Wars edition. So
Nice.
those I just had lying around, so I put them in a computer, and they're still pretty good, but obviously compared to GPUs today, they're a little bit old at this point.
I've never used Redshift personally. Is Redshift, does it rely a lot on GPU for render, or is that?
Yep. Yeah. Redshift is basically just a GPU renderer, and it's very fast at doing that. So that's why we basically rely on that completely for all our stuff. Other things like Octane are similar, but I believe Redshift is the fastest and the one that's least prone to giving noisy, unusable renders.
When you go from into the animatic and you start doing previs, you start prevising in the scene and you put that together. Do you model everything by hand? What's the process behind your modeling stage of characters and assets and props and environments?
So we do all the characters in ZBrush, and then all the actual other modeling in Cinema 4D. But for this film especially, there's a lot of pre-made models used in this scene in the convenience store. These are all pre-made models that I essentially bought separately and assembled into this this convenience store setup that I designed. Because you can't just go online and buy like a good-looking convenience store set. That's unfortunately not a thing. So this whole setup here is made up of probably like 25 or 30 sort of models that were all collected and sort of put into one scene. But yeah, for the actual characters themselves, they're all that's another spot where we tried to sort of save on time when it comes to doing modeling. So they're not made from scratch. They're basically start from a base mesh of a character, so a pre-modeled version of just a generic human, which we then tweak and morph and stretch to create like more stylized, more iconic looking character than what you might normally have. So fun fact, like the convenience store guy started as one base mesh, and then from there we took his model and then stretched and deformed him into the leprechaun model. So they're based off of the same guy.
Brilliant.
As another way of save on time and all that.
Is that the same amount of like vertices, not additional? Is it the same poly count essentially?
Yep, they're exactly the same. You could smoothly morph one into the other if you wanted to. It's just stretch your limbs, longer fingers, and of course the face is sort of a lot older looking for the leprechaun guy, but it is just the same guy. So we are also able to save on some time doing texturing because they have the same UVs, so we're able to recycle those between characters as well. But obviously one is much older than the other.
I love the look of everything about this short. The leprechaun guy, terrifying, especially seeing those tiny pinhole eyes in the convenience store.
Yeah. I love those.
It's great. So this is did you do facial capture for this? What's this we're looking at here? How did you do the facial animation for these?
We don't do any facial animation, facial motion capture for these things. I find that to be too imprecise for the sort of beats I'm looking to hit. So it's all animated by hand using this sort of bare bones facial rig that I've made over the years. So this is another one of my characters where I have the same. You can see the facial rig on the left, which just has a couple of pre-made sort of things for smiles, frowns, opening the jaw, smiling, things like that we can mix and match to create all these different sort of emotions. And one of the biggest challenges in this short film is the convenience store guy basically has to have the look of pure terror on his face for like so many scenes. So that was a whole process of sort of revamping the facial rig, adding a few more shapes to it so he can really push his pushes eyebrows and pushes the rest of his face into looking a bit more terrified, because well, these rigs that I create here, they wouldn't work for like a Pixar film. You know, they don't have the ability to speak and do really subtle emotions, but they work for the sort of more action horror focused things that I do in like Rump of the Night or in Unlucky Charms. So they're very tailor made to the sort of work that I normally do.
Yeah, clearly, as long as it can do a terrified face in this one, then yeah, that's half the battle.
I've even made this like little chart here that shows all the different face shapes that I have to hit to create a usable face rig. So, various half smiles, half frowns, sneers, blinks, all that sort of stuff I've collected into this sheet, and that just is a good reference for me when I'm putting together a long list of like blend shapes to do in the characters.
So you do blocking stage?
Yeah, no. There's no blocking for this, since it's basically just a motion capture the whole way through.
You go straight into it.
Yep. So basically, every scene, it comes in at a more complete stage because of motion capture. Takes off the initial brunt of the work of trying to set that all up. So once we put together that whole animatic, we then go into the actual motion capture stage, where I'll then act out the whole film. I did this in about 2 hours for Unlucky Charms. And once I get all that data, I can just bring it into the blank scenes and then build it up from there.
Yeah, that's a great time saver, and it works so well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, motion capture obviously isn't a be-all, end-all to animation. There's still a bunch of work that goes on top of it, doing the facial animation, making sure the feet stick to the ground, and that he makes contact with the things he needs to do. But it definitely, I couldn't animate this whole film from scratch. It would take way too long and not look as good. So I'm very thankful for that we have like these days like good consumer grade motion capture that doesn't cost like $1 bajillion.
What about cleanup? Was there obviously that's the next stage after mocap?
Yeah, so luckily, I mean, I used the Perception Neuron 3 from Noidum. That's like the suit I use, and it's a very stable suit, and so there's not a lot of traditional motion capture cleanup, fixing jitters and making sure it feels a bit more stable. Basically, what you see is what you get, and any cleanup I do is basically, like I said, making sure feet stick to the ground, making sure his hands make contact where they need to be. And then just sort of tweaking, like, if I want him to be looking like, 30 degrees to the left or something like that. Doing that sort of like performance cleanup is a lot of what I do. But in terms of making sure it's not jittery and all that, there's not much of that going on.
Like, it's clear that you like to add physics, and like I noticed the earrings and the chance for like particles with the Lucky Charms. Is that something that you just enjoy doing? Doing
the physics for the cereal, like a guy being pushed into it, I was not looking forward to doing that. But luckily, after a bunch of finagling, I eventually got something that was surprisingly stable for having like a 20,000 plus Lucky Charms. I was very happy it didn't drive me crazy, because I've done simulation things before, and it's always been like something I bang my head against the desk trying to figure out, and eventually I just have to come up with another workaround.
Have you got a favorite stage that you enjoy doing most?
Yeah, definitely by the end. That is my favorite process. Doing compositing, doing the editing and sound design, all that stuff.
Is there any sort of tips that you have for like efficiency on a production like this?
I have a whole sort of workflow that I use at this point, which there's a lot of corner cutting, a lot of streamlining of the whole process to make it more achievable for one person. I did do I think a talk for Maxon back in like July that sort of went over my whole workflow. And I recommend people check that out if they want a more detailed look at that. But it does sort of boil down to some of the things I talked about before with like ZBrush, where I use a base mesh to start from for modeling characters instead of going completely from scratch, which would take a lot longer. Then designing sets, where I use a lot of like pre-made models that I'll modify and sort of work or tweak to work in the scene, as opposed to again modeling completely from scratch, and then motion capture is another thing, and then just basically having making like my bare bones facial rigs that they're designed only to do what they need to do, and they're not over designed and over engineered to be like this fully realized character. So all that sort of stuff combines to make these things still take a long time, but take a lot less time than they might normally do if I was just one person starting like my very first short film and just doing this all from scratch, as opposed to starting with my more optimized workflow that I've gone through at least 4 or 5 times at this point.
Do you go shot for shot when you're creating these, or do you kind of go back and forth with creating shots?
The shots were completed in the order that they happened in the film.
Okay.
In previous short films, I've sort of jumped around a little bit more, and especially if there's a really hard shot that I just have no idea how I'm going to do, I save that to like the very end when I might have learned a few more techniques along the way. But for this one, since there's not really one standout shot that's like super complicated, it was just beginning to end and pretty simple from there.
Is there anything from the stop motion world and experience that you've carried over?
Not really much of the stop motion stuff that's been brought over, but in terms of a way to introduce yourself to filmmaking, that's kind of how I started with Lego stop motion back in like 2008, I think, when I was like really young. And that sort of started to develop how I light scenes, how I do cinematography, and all that stuff. And, practicing with Legos on like these very small pre-built sets. That was like such an easy way to ease myself into the whole filmmaking process and start to learn like, how to do better lighting, how to do good camera angles, things like that. So, that was definitely a benefit.
How are you tackling like the camera side of things? Is there all done by hand? Is there any fancy virtual cameras?
For this short, it's really like a 50-50 between the just hand animated cameras that are like very simple, like dollies or pushing in, things like that. And then the other half of it was not quite a virtual camera, but I have an app on my phone, which is, I believe it's called Camtrack AR or Camtrack VR, one of the two. That basically does record the motions of your phone in 3D space, and you can then bring that into like Cinema 4D. I try to use that when possible because it really does sort of boost the realism, I guess, of like a shot and make it feel a bit more, I guess, visceral.
Yeah, there's nothing that can beat that sort of real feeling of a
camera
exactly
move,
even if it's just a subtle sort of shake and movement and noise to the camera.
Yeah.
Adding it on like sort of noise modifiers, you can never beat having that real movement. When are you making a feature film? That's a question I've got to ask. And if you were to ask to make a feature film, surely you wouldn't do it on your own.
Yeah, no. Maybe one day, there'll be some sort of feature film from me, but I currently am very afraid of having to tackle something more than 4 minutes because of all the stuff that goes into that. But like you said, if I were to do that, there'd be a actual pipeline, more people, more than one for sure, and hopefully that would be a lot more manageable.
Have you got any advice for anybody that were to make a short film in CG? On their own.
My main bit of advice that I try to give is pretty much the way I sort of built up to doing what I do now, which is starting like so very small. I'm very much guilty of when I first started out doing CG of like trying to jump right into doing like this really long, like it was gonna be like a 6-minute short film. And I did a bunch of like prep for that, character modeling, all that stuff, and eventually it sort of just collapsed because this was like my first actual like CG animation that I had done. So yeah, really just starting small, ramping up, and using each of these projects as a way to motivate yourself to learn like a new technique, which is what I do. Like Grump of the Night was my excuse to try and really learn doing cloth simulations on characters, and this one, was a way to refine the skin shader techniques that I use and the way I texture characters. So that's just sort of my way of learning and my way of actually being able to slowly ramp up to doing what I do today.
Talking of, so you it's Redshift and Cinema 4D. Have you been interested or toyed with any other types of software like the buzzword of Unreal Engine and other kind of like pipelines? Is there anything that you have your eye on to test out? Or are you happy to stick with what you know? Because there's nothing wrong with that, of course.
Yeah, pretty much. At the moment, I stick with sort of what I know. I have. I keep my eye on the Unreal stuff. It's interesting. It's not up to the visual fidelity of 3D at the moment, so I stick with Redshift and Cinema 4D. But I imagine in like 5 years, 10 years, that's going to be pretty much how it is. It's going to be pretty real time, which will be great for my sanity. But yeah, for other workflows, it's sticking with my ZBrush, Substance Painter, Cinema 4D, Redshift, After Effects. That's my whole my whole workflow, sticking with that at the moment. And then as things pop up, along the way, maybe I'll start to learn that, maybe do some fluid simulations at one point, or try to really nail down doing cloth simulations and get that to not be a janky mess. But yeah, at the moment, I'm going to keep it safe,
Yeah, stick to what you know. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yep.
Question, have you ever opened up Blender before?
I have. Yeah, I did do a tutorial for it in 2020 when I was wondering what it was all about, But, it definitely has a bit more of a learning curve, but I wish Cinema 4D had the support and the all the awesome plugins that people make for that one.
Brilliant.
But Blender, yeah, it's definitely another one to. That's why I recommend to everyone else who wants to get into 3D, because it's free and it's only getting better and better. So,
yeah, who knows? It may be part of your pipeline in the future. Okay, Kris, is there anything that you want to sort of mention or anything to finish on?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. That's pretty much what's going on with me, and something's awry.
Brilliant. Awesome, man. Well, Kris, like I said, I could easily talk for a lot longer than this, but it's so great to speak to you, Kris.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me as well.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah. And let's stay in touch, man, because we would love to, keep up with what you're doing and who knows, collaborate one day in the future. But thank you so much for your time, Kris.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All the best, and we'll speak to you soon, man. Take care.
See ya.
Thanks, Kris. Bye, buddy.